Ashes by J.C. Jarrett. Chapter 12. Monastery of the Damned. The sun rose over the horizon, casting beams of sunlight through the windows of the small room. Rand woke slowly, opening his eyes. Looking down, he found Janna's head rested on his chest, her golden hair spilling down her bare back. He did not want to move in fear of waking her. She seemed so peaceful. Reaching down, he stroked a stray hair back from her face and smiled at seeing a grin cross her face. Her eyes lightly fluttered open, looking up at him. Rand felt his heart skip a beat, and before he knew what he was saying, the words were on his lips, then let out into the world. "I am so in love with you." Janna's response went beyond words. Their lips met, and eyes closed. The kiss was long and loving, and when it had ended, the pair of lovers looked deeply into each other's eyes. They both knew that their lives would never be the same after this, that after today, they would begin a new life together. When the young lovers came down the stairs, they found Kudan with a huge platter of food, piled with eggs and bacon. The barbarian noticed that something had changed between Rand and Janna, and was happy for them, if even he was a bit jealous of the situation. They joined the barbarian, Rand stealing a slice of bacon from his overflowing plate. Kudan eyed him dangerously. Rand smiled at the barbarian. Rubeus started down the stairs, a spring in his step, since today was the day his plan came to be. Turning to take the next flight of steps, he went to pass a hooded figure. With a burst of speed that seemed unreal, the hooded figure was suddenly upon the wizard. Rubeus found himself pinned to the wall, the extra-wide blade of a short sword at his throat. The hood came back to reveal golden eyes and pale white skin of a highborn. The highborn's jet-black hair was pulled back in a ponytail. He spoke in an oddly cadenced voice, barely a whisper into the wizard's face. "So, Rubeus, we meet at last." The highborn's solid gold eyes seemed to look through the wizard. "I am Jander, sent by our mutual friend, to ensure you hold your end of the bargain." Rubeus began to stammer and stutter. It was not often that the wizard was stricken, dumb and mute. "Listen closely, you will not see me coming, and by the time you know I am near, you will already be dead." Jander pressed the blade harder into the wizard's throat. Drawing a bead of blood, Jander smiled as it rolled down the blade. Alistair expects his artifact. With a flash he pulled the sword away, and without another word the highborn turned and headed back down the stairs, as if nothing had ever happened. Rubeus rubbed his throat, then checked his hand for blood. Finding a crimson stripe across his fingertips, he reached back to his throat and checked again. Jander moved through the common room of the tavern, his hood up, catching the eye of Rand as he passed the table. Golden eye met dark as the highborn swept from the building. Rand looked back toward Janna, but caught sight of Rubeus entering the room from upstairs. Rubeus made his way with conviction toward the trio. Taking a seat, he looked at them each in turn. 1,000 golden talons. He tried to catch his breath. Then he repeated, 1,000, he said again. "What has happened?" Rand said to the wizard. "Nothing. Just do your job and you get paid," the wizard said as he stood and walked away, saying, "I'll be here when you return." The three friends looked at each other in confusion, all wondering why the sudden increase in pay. And was that blood on the wizard's neck? Before an hour was up, the trio was on the go, but this time there was no road to follow. They had to travel overland to the north, toward the Great Gorge. The wooded area was light, and the hills rose and dipped softly, making the trek almost enjoyable. Using the sun's position and just a good sense of direction, they felt they stayed on course. As the sun was dipping low in the sky and evening was setting in, the temperature suddenly dropped. Though the day was in early winter, it had been mild all day until now. Not only had the temperature changed, but the land around had taken a totally different feel. The ankle-high grass was now gone and replaced with bare earth. The trees that stood were twisted and black. Even the smell in the air changed. Once being a clean, crisp smell of wood, was now tingled with something putrid. The farther they traveled, the worse it became. But before long a large ruin showed itself in the distance. The sky was nearly dark. Huge dark clouds hung low and covered the sky. The trio stopped on top of a large hill, looking down onto the monastery. "Is that movement down by the ruin?" Kudan said, peering into the distance. Jana looked toward the ruin. It was a large two-story building that was right on the edge of the slowly expanding Great Ravine. A portion of the back corner of the building was missing, having been swallowed up into the ravine. Sections of the second floor had collapsed over time, giving this once proud structure an ominous look. "I could go down and scout it out," she said with confidence. Rand and the barbarian looked at the young beauty with uncertainty. Not in her ability, but if there was the dead in the ruin, it would be very dangerous. Rand studied the hilltop and began to think that maybe it would be best to camp here for the night and go into the ruin with daylight as an ally. He looked at the barbarian and then at Jana. "Let's camp here and use first light to make our way." Before an hour had passed, they had started a small cook fire and laid out bedrolls. Rand knelt by the fire with 3 small metal cups full of water. He pushed them into the coals to allow the water to heat to a boil. While he waited, he added a few chunks of dried meat and some seasonings, leaving it to slowly boil. Looking up from his cooking, Rand puzzled as to why there were only 2 bedrolls on the ground. "Where is Jana?" he asked the barbarian, who had stretched out on his bedroll and was quietly looking at the stars. Jana peered over the broken-down stone wall as she knelt in the dead grass. She could hear shuffling of boots on earth all around her. The sight that she beheld merely took her breath in fear. What used to be the courtyard of this monastery was now the stuff of nightmares. Jana performed a quick rough count, estimating that there were 40 or more undead shuffling around aimlessly. Some were just bone, while others had dried, rotting flesh. The smell was nearly worse than the sight. Jana now felt a little foolish for running off in the night to scout the ruin. She knew when Rand found out he would be furious with her. The dead must have somehow sensed her presence, for they began to cluster near to where she hid. Seeing this, Jana decided it was time to make a hasty retreat. Still in a crouching position, Jana moved away silently from the ruin, and was soon far enough to traverse into a light run back to camp. What she did not see was the turn of the undead head, whose milky white eyes caught a glimpse of her as she sped away, leaving the creature shambling after. Jana entered the firelight of the small camp to be welcomed by the disapproving face of Rand. She looked at him and started to explain, but was suddenly cut off by the clawed hand grabbing at her shoulder. Tucking her left shoulder away from the zombie, she spun, drawing her blades. Rand sprung to his feet, grabbing his 2-handed sword from the ground next to him. Neither Jana nor Rand reacted as fast as Kudan did. As Jana jumped back, the huge hammer came spinning in over and over. The hammer's impact was devastating to the zombie, catching it between the right shoulder and its rancid head. The upper body of the undead thing seemed to explode, raining down bits of gore upon the unsuspecting Jana. The zombie's legs stood for just a moment, then stumbled forward 1 step, collapsing in a heap. Jana looked back at Kudan, who was starting forward to fetch his hammer. "I know I was wrong in running off alone and bringing back a guest," she said in levity, breaking the men and causing them to laugh. Luckily, the rest of the night passed uneventfully, and come morning the trio moved toward the ruin in the sun's first light. When they neared the same spot behind the wall that Jana had hid last night, all 3 huddled behind the damaged stone wall. "There are too many," Rand said with a tinge of fear in his voice. Jana moved farther down the wall. Peeking around the end, she spotted a slightly ajar door into the ruin. Looking back at the others, she waved a signal to them to move closer to her. Just one of the dead stood between them and the door. Kudan watched in amazement as Rand and Jana tried to silently plan their attack. Finally, tired of waiting, the barbarian jumped to his feet. He sprinted toward the zombie, putting his shoulder into the dead creature's midsection. He scooped it upon his shoulder and ran full speed into the building. Rand and Jana stopped their silent planning and watched in fascination and a bit of amusement the antics of their barbarian companion, then quickly followed him into the ruin. Though the door was opened halfway, the light from outdoors seemed very weak in this desecrated place. There was no sound, and to Jana it seemed she almost could hear her pounding heart. Kudan stepped back from a stone pillar where he had crushed the zombie in his charge. Rand took a deep, musty breath and exhaled to his surprise, seeing his breath, the temperature being so much colder in this den of evil. Reaching into a pack, Rand pulled out a small lantern and began to snap flint and steel to light it. After several tries, the wick lit. Rand raised the light high to illuminate the room. The floor was covered in so much dirt, it was unlevel in places. Dust glittered in the air as the light played across it, but the light would not reach the corners. The trio began to slowly move through the ruin, each footfall echoing off the stone walls. The rustle of cloaks and the clink of weapons seemed extremely loud in the overbearing silence. As they neared the end of a long hallway, they came to a closed door. Kneeling and placing an ear to the door, Janna listened intently. Looking up at Rand and Kudan, she shook her head, telling them that she heard nothing. As she stood, Rand reached out and pulled the latch. The sound of the door latch was like a hammer hitting an anvil in this silent place. As the door opened, a sudden burst of movement started the trio. Bony hands like claws tore at the ancient door, ripping chunks of the old wood away. The sound was nearly deafening in these silent halls, and they all feared that it may bring all the dead in the place down upon them. Blades in hands, the trio prepared to defend themselves as the dead entered the room. A skeleton stepped into the room. Rags hung from the old yellow bones. It looked upon the living, the hollow eye sockets glowing a faint red. The claw-like hands swiped in faster than the barbarian could react, digging nasty rips in his fur vest and drawing scratching marks across his chest. The two-handed sword of Rand shot up, catching the pelvis of the skeleton, tearing through it, plunged into the ribs. Bone shards flew into the air as the undead thing collapsed in a heap. Quickly, it was replaced with several more dead pushing into the room. Straight sabers flashed out in precious swings, not going for bone itself, but the joints and connections. After a few quick thrusts and slashes, the arms fell free from the attacking skeleton. The now unarmed creature still came in, biting toward the blonde warrior, who in a deft move spun, taking off its head. The hollow sound of the skull bouncing on the floor echoed down the hallway. The three skilled warriors made quick work of the attacking dead, and soon the ruins were once again silent. As the trio moved into the room, their boots crunching on the fragments of bone from the destroyed dead, they looked around this room in wonder. The room was 2 stories tall, the walls lined with shelves covered in books. Set in a regular pattern around the room were freestanding shelves with an assortment of books, tomes, and scrolls. Sitting on the floor, its back resting on a shelf, was an armored figure. Rand neared to see that under the visored helm was a mummified face. The plate armor was well made and still held a bit of a shine. Cobwebs hung from the armored corpse. Kneeling, Rand wiped a hand across the armored breastplate to see the emblazoned sword and shield of the Order of Tal. "Taline Paladin," Rand said in a whisper. "So, that story was true?" Janna asked, looking about the room. Her eyes fell upon a bundle of black robes laying near a large wooden chair in the center of the large room. Noticing there was no dust or cobweb visible upon the robe, unlike the rest of the room, Janna started toward the robes, then noticed a blackened skeletal hand sticking from underneath the robes. She slowed when she thought she saw it make the slightest twitch of movement. Laying near the robes and covered in dust and cobwebs like the rest of the room was a smaller skeleton. In its bony grip rested a silver-hilted long sword, its blade shiny and bright. Kudan watched Janna showing caution toward the robes, looking at them, his mind on the tale of the bard in the inn. Sudden cracks of twisting bone echoed through the room as the bundle of robes stirred. The sound escalated as the figure stood. All eyes were upon the pitch-black skull with green glowing eye sockets, peering from the darkness of the hood. A black hand raised with one bone finger pointed outward. The creature's jaw opened as an unearthly wail escaped. The finger pointed directly at Janna. Its tip began to glow with a red light. This played out very fast. Kudan took faster action. The barbarian rushed toward the blonde warrior and with both hands pushed her to the floor. At the same moment, a red bolt shot from the black finger, hitting the huge man in the middle of his chest. Rand and Janna watched in horror as Kudan looked at them in fear in his eyes for the first time ever. as his body was quickly being covered in the red light. "No!" the barbarian yelled in protest as the red light completely covered him. The red light suddenly burst from Kudan in a shower of golden dust, leaving behind the clean white bones of the brave barbarian. The white bones stood for just a second, then collapsed in a heap on the floor. Rand and Jana suddenly realized that the golden dust that drifted lightly to the ground was the disintegrated body of their now dead companion. "Kudan," she called from the floor, her hand reaching toward the golden dust. Jana's eyes focused beyond where the bones of the barbarian lay, seeing a small pedestal with an onyx black circlet bearing a large oval gemstone that sparkled like a night sky full of stars. Instantly she knew this was the item they had came for, the reason Kudan was now dead. Again the black finger pointed out, the skull letting loose with its unearthly scream. The red beam fired at Jana, who leapt to the right, coming up with swords in hands. Rand, several feet behind Jana, tumbled to the left away from the armored corpse. The red beam slammed into the armor with a crackle of golden light that overpowered the red and quickly faded away. Jana noticed that when the onyx skeleton fired the beams of magic, the gemstone on the circlet shone with an inner light. This was what had caught her attention before. Jana looked to Rand, and they both seemed to have the same idea, to split the evil creature's attention. The onyx black skull turned its green gaze upon Jana and began to speak. "Was he a friend of yours?" it hissed in an evil voice. The creature began to chuckle, its laughter hollow of emotion. "He died so heroically, pushing you away and taking the spell himself. I cannot wait to watch you join him in instant death." The evil creature mocked the living. The creature quickly raised its hand, its finger glowing red, then suddenly froze in place, as if time had stopped. Dust in the air hung unmoving, and golden light began to pulse from the silver-hilted longsword. Rand and Jana looked to each other, still able to move and talk. "What has it done?" he called, puzzled. "I do not believe it's," she answered, but never finished as a ghostly head and shoulders began to emerge from the tip of the silver longsword. Soon the head was followed by a body, then a featherless body of a large man standing there ghostly and transparent. A white and golden light emanated from the ghost. "I used to be Dalius, a paladin of Tal. I can only hold him for so long before it breaks my hold on time. You must take the crown of the Dean and run away from here. Do not let it fall into the wrong hands, or the world will be in peril. It has the power to raise an army of the dead. The wielder would be unstoppable." The ghostly knight spoke quickly and to the point. "Why not destroy it now?" Rand said, moving toward the undead creature with his huge sword raised. "That is not how the magic of time works. Any attack will break my hold, and Mordenvex will kill you." Dalius spoke, his voice echoing. Jana reached out and took the circlet, she said, looking at Rand. "Rubius cannot get this. Who knows what he would do," she finished. "Go now. Run, keep it safe and keep it secret. It calls to evil. It wants to be used. Now, go," with strain in his ghostly voice. Rand and Jana did not hesitate. They ran from the ruins, back down the long corridors to the door. Exiting into the courtyard, they found the magic had reached here as well, holding the massive dead in its tracks. The pair sprinted now in the open, for the tree line, and when they was a few dozen yards away, a great flash of golden light erupted from the ruin. Jana and Rand turned just in time to see the scores of undead be destroyed by the burst of golden light, then stood together, looking upon the ruin, tears in her eyes and anger in his, over the lose of Kudan. Not far away, Gorathok the goblin crouched in the high grass with his hunting party, watching the magical display of light and the humans running from the ruin. "Let us go into the ruin and see what there is. Maybe a powerful weapon," the goblin said, in the goblin tongue to his party.